morning, Antoine Thompson, Executive Director, Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I know that we have a hearty discussion with a dynamic group of folks, and so we have a lot of ground to cover. And so we're going to get started right now. I'm just going to start by saying Happy Earth Day, which is this Saturday, April 22nd. But we in our world, we say every day is Earth Day. I want to just make some quick announcements. We are Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition. We're a clean energy transportation organization focused on the environment. We focus a lot on vehicle technologies as well to help make people live longer. I'm going to talk a lot about that today and how we use these technologies to help save lives. That's the whole goal, not just the planet, but the people that live on the planet as well. Just a couple quick announcements. We're kicking off the week today with our Justice 40 event. On Thursday, we will host a green drinks happy hour. It will take place at Sobe Restaurant in Lanham, Maryland tomorrow. It's about, depending on what time of day it is, 30 minutes to 45 minutes in Lanham from DC or Virginia. And it'll be really nice. We'll have actually some green drinks too. Kim will talk about that at the end, but it's free to attend. Look forward to you all being there 6 to 8 p.m. On Saturday, we're going to have an electric school bus tour and cleanup, right? We're going to be collaborating with those ladies of Delta Sigma Theta, the mayor's office, and their Clean Cities team. And we're actually going to go on 4 or 5 sites around DC on Saturday. We'll be meeting up in DC. We'll put that in the chat as well. So you come help us clean up. And also you can ride with us around DC in our electric school bus by Green Power Motors and K. Neal Truck and Bus Center. So we're looking forward to that. Next week from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. we'll host a growing EV capacity event in the DMV. That event will take place at the Metropolitan Council of Governments. I know Jeff King is off, but I see Leah Boggs is on and some of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments team. So we'll be at their office. Should be a nice event. Power-packed panel with consultants, public service commissioners, and we'll have a number of elected officials that will be speaking. And we'll have a number of the utility companies from the region as well. We can talk all we want about electric cars. We got to have electric trucks, but we got to have the capacity from the grid. So we'll talk a lot about that. Last thing I will mention is the Ron Flowers annual golf tournament. We'll also have a alternative vehicle display. We'll have everything from natural gas to hydrogen to electric cars, bio vehicles as well. So looking forward to that May 18th. So sign up. If you're not good at playing golf, we're actually going to have a golf clinic as well. And it includes lunch too. So you want to make sure you're there for that event. So if you've not registered, we will be calling you, emailing you, texting you to make sure. Part of the proceeds will go to scholarships for students this year in DC schools that are going to college. We will be expanding that scholarship next year to include other school districts outside of Washington, DC. I want to just take really quickly, I'm not going to read all their bios. I'm going to read just a couple things about these speakers. Kelly Crawford is a senior advisor of energy and equity and environmental justice at the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. She's an award-winning subject matter expert. Stacy Hartwell, an energy advisor. Stacy has been responsible for the sales and installation of over 40 megawatts of residential, commercial, and industrial solar in the Washington, D.C. area. She has managed solar projects from design to interconnection. She is chair for environmental and climate justice with NAACP Maryland State Conference as well. Jim Kuiper is a principal geospatial engineer at Argonne Laboratory. He is a technical coordinator for the Energy Zones mapping tool and the Geospatial Energy Mapper, and he's an often speaker on Justice 40 on how we make sure that the resources get to where they need to be. Edwin Luevanos. Edwin is the co-founder of Citizen Energy LLC, a new national initiative to increase EV adoption in disadvantaged communities with a big focus on Latino communities as well, and doing projects all over the country, and especially in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Margaret Smith is a technology manager in the U.S. Department of Energy Vehicle Technology Office. In this role, she provides oversight for a portfolio of projects to ensure consistency with the technology integration program. She also provides programmatic direction for the Clean Cities Coalition Network and has been leading the effort in assembling resources for the Justice 40 pilot that is taking place in many clean city offices across the country from here to Hawaii. Terry Travis is the managing partner and co-founder of EV Noir, an award-winning mobility technology group working at the intersection of electric, connected, shared, and autonomous vehicle technology. He utilizes his expertise to integrate e-mobility's best practices and e-mobility diversity, equity, and inclusion in the transportation sector. He is often sought after, a speaker at the White House and everywhere else around the world, Mr. Terry Travis. And he's an Omega man too. I hope that he gets it. All right. So as we get serious, I wanted to share just a couple quick things with you all. We will have a couple door prizes as well. So if you don't remember these dates, you'll miss out on the opportunity to win one of the door prizes. All right. So we're doing this event in honor of Earth Day. Earth Day was founded April 22nd, 1970 by Senator Nelson from Wisconsin. Another important fact, as we talk about Justice 40, the EPA was founded on December 2nd that year, 1970. So think about this. Earth Day, same year, founded EPA. And one of the things I often talk about is the fact that you had that, and then there was a 7-year gap between the EPA being founded in October 1st, 1977, which was the founding of the Department of Energy. Earth Day is currently celebrated in over 150 countries around the world. But when I think of not only Earth Day, I also think about environmental justice and equity as well. When I think about it, it reminds me of my home community of Western New York, places like Love Canal, which is, to me, one of the poster childs of the 1960s and 70s around environmental justice. Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis. Or we might think about Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Ike, or the recent train derailment in Ohio, and so many other countless stories. When I also think about environmental justice and Justice 40, I think about the new program on reconnecting communities, where we're reconnecting neighborhoods that have been disrupted by expressways. I think of places like MLK 33 Expressway in my hometown of Buffalo, where 20 years ago this year, I was leading an effort to reconnect that expressway. And Secretary Buttigieg was just there, Transportation was just there recently announcing some funding of a 20-year struggle to finally get more additional help. When I think of Justice 40, it also reminds me of major social and economic justice and restorative policies, such as the 8A program for commerce, or the veteran benefit programs like VA loans or VA credits for employment. The point is that we must be intentional in our efforts to save the planet and level the playing field for disadvantaged communities. We must listen to, learn from, engage with, and include as partners and empower not only the residents, but businesses and stakeholders in this process of Justice 40 related initiatives for transportation, from transportation to housing, from energy to the environment. We must be intentional in our efforts. So without further ado, as we kick off this panel, I want to make sure that we understand the seriousness of this moment, that Justice 40 is not only about investment, but it's also about saving lives and increasing the life expectancy for so many people. So I'm going to go to our first speaker, Kelly Crawford, is going to give us some remarks. She's helping to lead a lot of the influence, a lot of the equity and justice and inclusion efforts for the U.S. Department of Energy. So Kelly, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Antoine, and thanks for having me today. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up.
Good.
So I think Kim will bring up my slides. But I'm Kelly Crawford. I am coming from the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office. And I am the Senior Advisor for Energy Equity and Environmental Justice. I'm coming to you today from my hometown, Washington, D.C., which occupies the unceded ancestral lands of Nacotchtank. And I am happy to be sharing. Oh, am I muted? Are y'all still hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got an alert. Okay. And so I'm going to talk to you today about the Department of Energy and the work that we're doing to implement Justice 40 at the agency. Next slide. And so just a quick overview of some of the offices involved. First, we have the U.S. Department of Energy, which is led by Secretary Jennifer Granholm. And within that, we have the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, which is led by Shalonda Baker and her team, who are also lead the execution of all of our programs related to economic diversity. Next slide. I'm coming from the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. The mission of the ERE is to accelerate research, development, demonstration, and deployment of technologies and solutions to equitably transform America to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide by no later than 2050. Within the ERE, we have 4 sectors: Office of Sustainable Transportation, the Office of Renewable Power, and the Office of Energy Efficiency. And each of these offices contain renewable energy technologies such as vehicle technology, bioenergy technology, wind, water, geothermal, and solar, also buildings and advanced manufacturing. Next slide. We've worked through our important partnership with the Office of Economic Development and our peer offices across the department to develop and formalize EERE's areas for increasing equity in programming. And we hold a deep relationship with historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions. And these successful working relationships are key to implementing our Justice 40 goals and our ambitions to build a diverse pipeline to support the energy transition. Next slide. And so why are we doing this? We're implementing principles of energy justice throughout all of our project life cycles, and we're working to increase engagement from a broader set of stakeholders and being accountable to the feedback that they offer. This administration is adamant that the transition to a clean energy economy must benefit all Americans, including those from communities that have too long been marginalized and not afforded a seat at the table where decisions are made. Environmental justice is highlighted in a number of new initiatives, and we are deeply committed to executing the president's vision that 40% of our investments benefits disadvantaged communities. Next slide. And so just so that we're all on the same page on what do we mean by environmental justice, EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and practices. What this means is that fair treatment means that no population bears a disproportionate impact of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations from the execution of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and policies. What we do know is that the legacy of pollution runs long and deep in communities of color, and historically Black and Brown households have been more likely than other communities to live in the shadows of fossil fuel generation. And these communities live with a toxic legacy of air pollution that is a direct result of the structure and design of our energy system. Next slide. We also seek to address energy justice. An equitable and just transition will involve the sharing of the benefits and burdens of production and consumption of energy services. And we do still have a lot of work to do. Since 2006, over 90% of the electric vehicle income credits were received by top income quintile. Renters living in multifamily housing often lack access to home charging locations where 80% of electric vehicle charging currently occurs. And Black majority census tract have installed thus far 69% less rooftop solar than non-majority census tract of the same median household income. And so we still have some work to do ensuring that frontline communities that have been disproportionately impacted by energy services in the past do reap the benefits of these historic investments in renewable energy. Next slide. The agency has had a long history in addressing environmental justice, which began, which predates this administration, which we carry forward with some catalysts and some great funding resources and a new direction in this current administration. Next slide. We have three executive orders right now. And so not only does operationalizing environmental justice and equity align with EERE's mission, but we must also integrate equity into programs in response to this the Biden administration's three executive orders listed here. The second listed, which is Climate and Hold a Brom, contains the Justice 40 initiative, which states that 40% of benefits from certain investments must go to disadvantaged communities. DOE recognizes that underlying structural inequities and structural racism have resulted in development projects that have disproportionately and equitably harmed low-income communities and communities of color. And to ensure a stable and equitable transition to clean energy economy, also to avoid further harm to communities with environmental justice concerns, DOE is focused on ensuring that projects that receive funding through DOE Justice 40 covered programs adheres to the principles of environmental justice. Next slide. So what do we mean by Justice 40? It's a whole of government approach that makes it a priority that justice be central in every program, process, policy, and payment, aiming that 40% of overall benefits from certain federal investments, including investments in clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transit, and affordable sustainable housing, must flow to disadvantaged communities. Slide. So these are all of the covered programs by Justice 40. And as you can see, clean energy and energy efficiency are a covered program, and covered investments include investments in energy technology. Next slide. DOE has 23 program offices with covered programs, and that includes over 152 covered programs. There are 75 programs covered that are identified in EERE alone. And so we have an incredible amount of work to achieve Justice 40 that lives within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And so even getting this far, which is identifying all the covered programs, which were identified in 2021, is a great first step to making sure that we're identifying all the resources that need to be targeted towards communities that are disadvantaged. Next slide. So Justice 40, 3 parts, 40% of benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities. And so what are the benefits? And that's one of the things that we're working through now, is working on how are we quantifying the benefits, how are we tracking and measuring that these benefits are reaching communities that they're supposed to, and making sure that we've identified the both the positive benefits, but also the impacts of the work that is funded by the department. Next slide. And so here are the top priorities for benefits that the agency is focused on, which is decreasing energy burden in disadvantaged community, decreasing environmental exposures for disadvantaged communities, but then increasing parity in clean energy technology access, including increasing access to low-cost capital in disadvantaged communities to do clean energy projects, increasing clean energy enterprise creation, increasing clean energy jobs and job training, increasing energy resiliency in disadvantaged communities, and increasing energy democracy, including community ownership of disadvantaged communities. Next slide. And then the third part of is where does it go? So how do we identify the communities, and how do we track where these resources are going? There's been several tools that have been developed. The most important is the White House Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which was finalized in November of last year. And on top of that, DOE has also developed an energy justice dashboard, which further refines the targeting of disadvantaged communities to include additional additional criteria that are specific to clean energy. Go to the next slide, you'll see side by side the communities that are identified by the CGIS tool on the left, which identifies about 36% of US Census tracts as disadvantaged community, and then further refined on the right with the DOE working definition of energy justice. We further refined that to about 20% of US Census tracts. And so by using both tools, we can really target our resources to the communities that not only need and that are not only vulnerable, but also where we can really make a great impact specifically with our energy investments. Next slide. And so just to share some of EERE success, which my colleague Margaret's going to talk specifically about the Vehicle Technologies Office projects that have worked towards implementing Justice 40. But since 2021, all of our competitive awards from EERE have embedded language that requires applicants to integrate equity and justice within their proposals. Most recently, that's coming out in the form of a community benefits plan, which will be evaluated alongside technical merit of the projects, where applicants are asked to address how they will share resources with the community, what the community impacts will be, and also talk about how the project will account for creating the jobs, ensuring that it's meeting Justice 40 priorities, and also increasing diversity in STEM. We've also had many more of our competitive awards going further to include specific topics to address hard to reach or underserved communities. And we've also been initiating and expanding our work with historically Black colleges and universities and other MSIs to leverage existing resources at these historic institutions. So we've increased our number of awards to historically Black colleges and universities in FY22, and we're looking to double it as we go forward and grow the program. Next slide. And so what I have here, and I think that these slides will go out, are just some additional guides and fact sheets about Justice 40 and the programs that we have at the Department of Energy. And I think that's all that I have for this morning, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And we know that Kelly knows how to get into it. So we want you to sit tight, because I want you to get into this life expectancy discussion as well. Okay, so just bear with us for a few minutes. Okay. All right. Next, we're going to go to Margaret Smith, and I want to just give her a plug. She's spent some time in my great hometown of Buffalo, and she has been doing great work to uplift clean cities. There are over 75 offices across the country, and the White House actually just acknowledged some of the clean city offices yesterday. And so I just wanted for everybody to let you know we appreciate you carrying the water and carrying the banner as well, and lifting up all the great work that we have done and will be doing in the future. So Margaret, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much. I am happy to be here. Kelly did a great job of describing Justice 40 or J40, since we always need acronyms and abbreviations in the federal government. So Kelly gave you a view of J40 at DOE overall and at DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And I represent DOE's Vehicle Technologies Office, which is part of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and will be sharing with you examples of how we are applying J40 to our work. Next slide. I enjoy hearing Secretary Granholm talk about the Department of Energy as the solutions department, as delivering solutions to the nation's biggest problems. And that is what we're doing at the Vehicle Technologies Office. We're implementing solutions to some of our nation's biggest problems. We're building an equitable clean energy future, decreasing transportation emissions, improving transportation affordability, promoting American-made energy solutions, and creating jobs and economic growth. Our work spans a portfolio of research, development, demonstration, and deployment projects from the vehicle component level to the full transportation system. I work in our technology integration program, which is the outreach, education, and deployment arm of the Vehicle Technologies Office. And our 5 core activities are Clean Cities Coalitions, information and tools, technical assistance, training, outreach, and partnerships, and financial assistance. So we work closely with the nationwide network of local Clean Cities Coalitions to support local decision-making, help stakeholders evaluate transportation needs and energy choices, and fund competitively awarded projects. Next slide. More than 75 DOE designated Clean Cities Coalitions work in communities across the country to implement alternative fuels, fuel-saving technologies, and new mobility choices. Our coalitions represent more than 84% of the US population, and they are working in urban, suburban, and rural communities to place more than 1.3 million alternative fuel vehicles on the road. There is a lot of great stuff happening with Clean Cities, but as many people on this webinar know, there are under-resourced, underserved, overburdened communities that are not as plugged in to our network as we would like, or are not as plugged into federal resources as we would like. And Clean Cities has a fantastic foundation to be critical players in this administration's Justice 40 initiative. Next slide. So when the White House released its interim implementation guidance for the Justice 40 initiative, it named 21 federal programs as Justice 40 pilot programs, including the Vehicle Technologies Office and Clean Cities. As a Justice 40 pilot program, we were tasked with maximizing the benefits of our investments that flow to disadvantaged communities. Next slide. DOE does have Justice 40 policy priorities described here in green. Kelly listed these in one of her slides. And with that high-level leadership, we have been looking at how does this apply to the work that happens at Clean Cities Coalition? How does this apply to transportation? So I would translate these high-level DOE Justice 40 policy priorities to Clean Cities and Clean City stakeholders as reducing energy and transportation costs, improving air quality, increasing clean vehicle access and adoption, connecting communities with funding, foster business opportunities and economic development, providing job training and workforce development, enhancing community energy diversification, resiliency, and decarbonization, and community engagement and capacity building. Next slide. So we developed a strategy that we've been implementing over the past 2 years to maximize the benefits of our investments that flow to disadvantaged communities or Justice 40 communities. We have been working to improve our competitive financial assistance process. We've been expanding our reporting processes and metrics measurement capabilities, and we created a new initiative, the Clean Cities Energy.
Did you mute?
You must have hit a spot. Margaret?
Hit unmute again. There you go.
I was connected through my phone, but somehow I just got disconnected. So now I'm just going to use my computer for audio and everybody
No
around me can
worries.
hear through the walls. So that's fine. So we have been implementing these 3 efforts over the past 2 years, and we're starting to see some results, and it's so exciting. Next slide. These slides will be shared afterwards, so I won't read through everything on the next few slides because I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers. But I do want to mention that for our funding opportunity that we released in fiscal year 2022, we implemented some very specific strategies to try to address barriers that prevent underserved communities from benefiting from our funding. Next slide. We also had at least $34 million worth of topics in that funding opportunity, specifically targeting benefits to underserved communities. Those selections have not been announced yet, but we hope to have that announcement coming out very soon. And then I would love to be invited back, Antoine, to talk about the projects that we award once we award them. Next
Of
slide.
course. We'd love for you. You can come back anytime you want.
Thank you. We also, along the lines of metrics, we are looking at trying to be able to measure the benefits of our projects that flow to Justice 40 communities related to investments, energy democracy, energy burden, environmental considerations, and clean energy jobs. And we've been starting to collect data from our funded projects so that we can measure these metrics. It is difficult to get that data. You're trying to not put such severe reporting requirements into our funding that underserved communities don't even have the capacity to be a part of the projects. But we also want to be able to measure the benefits of our work that flow to underserved communities. So it's a difficult balance to strike, and we are working through that right now. Next slide. And the third aspect of our strategy is our Clean Cities Energy and Environmental Justice Initiative. Our Clean Cities coalitions are experts at pulling together project partnerships, securing funding, and implementing projects. As we see an increase in clean transportation funding opportunities, especially through the bipartisan infrastructure law, our Clean Cities coalitions can serve as the critical matchmaker to ensure underserved communities benefit from these investments and co-create projects. This Energy and Environmental Justice Initiative is providing Clean Cities Coalition's training, resources, and funding to pursue projects that prioritize community engagement and include underserved communities as critical partners, critical paid partners in these projects. We started with the first phase that was a webinar series for all of our coalitions. And we had a third phase where about 30 of our coalitions participated in a very intensive deep dive workshop series to have transformative experiences of understanding how energy and environmental justice can apply to their work. And we announced last fall that we have selected 17 of our coalitions to fund them hiring a full-time community engagement liaison for 2 years to do community engagement work with underserved communities, develop a community transportation needs assessment, and help them develop project ideas that start with listening to the community for their priority and their needs. Next slide. Some additional resources that I always recommend checking out: our Clean Cities website, our Alternative Fuel Data Center, and fueleconomy.gov. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Margaret. Great. A lot of great information. And one of the things that jumped out is I love the slide that talked about the air, the funding, and all that. So we should definitely, I love the way you laid that out, nice and easy to understand. So next, we're going to go to Terry Travis, who is really doing an amazing job around the electrification, education, outreach, and deployment, working both the public and private sectors. And to make sure we do it right, that this is not like the computer explosion, right? We learned a lot from COVID, not that some of us didn't already know that since the 80s and 90s. So Terry's helping to do a lot in that space to get the word out. So Terry, the floor is yours.
Well, first, let me thank you, Antoine and staff, for inviting us to participate today. I think it's this is a really important topic, and we've spent a lot of time working through, in collaboration with the private sector, as well as through federal agencies to actually help accelerate this. And I think it's really important that we have these forums and more so that, the folks who can benefit from this are really engaged in these conversations. And it's great to see some familiar faces, a lot of folks who are panelists and attendees. Like, it's really good to see you all engaged in this conversation. So really quickly, I'm Terry Travis, co-founder and managing partner at EV Here's a quick snapshot of my team. We work on electric, connected, shared, and autonomous vehicle technologies, working with a number of folks on the team on this call, as well as a number of folks across the country, as well as internationally. As we think about this, the path forward, we think about Justice 40 and how this really, is impacting and has the opportunity to impact communities. We're at an inflection point where we're seeing the fact that we're seeing once in a lifetime investment coming from the administration to really accelerate clean transportation and decarbonization across different pathways and sectors. And so part of the work that we do is thinking about this path forward is decarbonizing the movement of people, goods, and increasingly services. And so working with some of the partners that you saw in the previous slides, such as, utilities and automotive manufacturers and charging network companies, like, it's really important that we begin to level set and set the framework for how Justice 40 can be implemented as we move forward. Why equity and e-mobility and Justice 40 is critically important. There are a number of factors, but these are the primary ones that we really focus in on. Public health. If you don't have your health, it doesn't matter what your transportation options are. And so our co-founder, Dr. Francis, has published quite a bit of work on the social determinants of health and how transportation emissions in particular are impacting particularly communities across the country, as well as zeroing in on communities that are often left out of the conversation. Environmental well-being, and then an area that I think is important, critically important, is economic development and real economic inclusion. For us, we have been working in a space for quite some time, and there are just a handful of diverse companies. I see Luis on the call, I see a few other folks, but the idea is that we really need to diversify this. We're talking about $1 trillion investment just in the private sector. And then when you begin to think about what the governments are doing around the world, there's a real opportunity for economic inclusion, and really happy to see that this is prioritized as we think about Justice 40. Wanted to provide a historical perspective as well as we think through this. Some of the most pivotal and critical points in our nation's history have revolved around transportation. So if you think about Plessy versus Ferguson, Rosa Parks, Montgomery bus boycott, the Freedom Riders. And then if you bring that fast forward to what's happening, in the 90s, you have Rodney King. And there are a number of instances that transportation has been at the crux or intersection of these very pivotal moments in America.
Just 1 second.
History and organization is not just what happened. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were
Yeah,
breaking
you're
up for
freezing a
second.
little.
Okay, sorry about that. The thing is, transportation is not just getting from point A to point B, but really about providing access to communities. So we're talking about access to education, access to social services, access to healthcare, dental appointments, good paying jobs. Like all of these things are really critical. So when we begin to think about, this transition to a cleaner and greener future, that transition is much more comprehensive than I think most people realize in the beginning. Some of the reasons that, we've seen is addressing transportation burden, again, going back to public health, financial savings. If you think about the fact that, and I'll get to this in subsequent slides, but we launched a national or international organization of diversity drivers. And many of the reasons that they are participating in this ecosystem is because of that financial incentive and savings that they experience. In addition to that, we're estimating about between 2 and 10 million jobs being created through this e-mobility ecosystem. And so it's important that we prioritize those communities that have often been hit first and worst. Here's a quick example of how transportation emissions, the number one cause of climate change, affects the body system. So as we see CO2 emissions impact the body, it impacts the brain or cognitive systems, it impacts the lungs, the reproductive systems, all of those things that are critically important to the well-being of folks who are living and residing in communities across the country. To even expound a little bit more, if we think about the map on the left illustrates the counties with the worst air pollution. There's a number of folks who always ask, why is certain areas like California leading in this conversation? Well, one of the reasons is that California has 7 of the 10 most polluted counties in the country. And so the idea is that it's why you're starting to see public policy and investment really ramp up. On the right side, you see an illustration of where counties are in terms of diversity. And there's a lot of overlap in terms of where these two maps are in terms of air pollution as well as diversity. For us, it's really not about light duty passenger vehicles, but it's really focused in on all modes of transportation. So we do a lot of work in ranging from school bus electrification. Well, let me back that up. We do a lot of work ranging from e-bikes and scooters all the way up to medium heavy duty electrification with school buses, light duty passenger vehicles, transit, et cetera. We think that all communities should have access to clean transportation, and Justice 40 is a vehicle for us to be able to do that, but whatever mode fits their unique needs. To that point, one of the things that we produced last year was a medium heavy duty policy packet that really expounded upon how the medium heavy duty sector, which accounts for about 5% of the vehicles on the road, accounts for about 33% of the emissions that are happening nationally. So it's really important that policymakers, private industry, communities are able to sit down at a table and begin to think about this in a holistic perspective. Another thing that, and I'll drop these links into the chat as we are going on, we facilitate and produced a public policy toolkit that may be helpful for some of the stakeholders on the call as we begin to think about this, like what can be done to help advance, more equitable, just transition, looking at this from a policy vantage point, but then taking in all those factors as well. One of the things that we're seeing as we talk about economic inclusion is investment in terms of, as we see more vehicles and more brands offering, products, whether that be light duty passenger vehicles like the F-150, or we see transit buses, school bus electrification, as well as battery recycling, mineral mining, utility investment. There's a lot of investment, like I said earlier, $1 trillion worth of investment coming into this space. And so this is a map that illustrates the supply chain currently and where we are. And so it really illustrates that as we think about this from a Justice 40 vantage point, one of the things that we're doing is really trying to examine how we prepare the next generation of workforce of tomorrow in this conversation. And it's really, important that we get these communities, again, that have been impacted first and worst to the front of the line so they are able to benefit in a way that, haven't in the past. To this point, we developed a program, an e-mobility fellowship pipeline program that currently has 6 universities. And, those universities are Spelman, Texas Southern, Tillerson, Morgan State, North Carolina A&T, and Claflin. Our next cohort will expand to HSIs and potentially technical schools as well. But the idea is that our theory of change is that, part of this transition, as we think about the public health aspects, as we address transportation burden, it's going to be critically important to get folks in the workforce of tomorrow. And so we've been partnering with the private sector and working with government agencies to really accelerate this program, to expand it to more opportunities for more universities. But we think that it's really important that we create this pipeline for folks that can benefit in all the different ways that we've talked about. Here's a quick illustration. We took some of our fellows to South by Southwest recently, where they were able to meet with a number of folks, including the Mary Barrows, the CEO of General Motors, Administrator Bott from Federal Highways, and a number of others. But the idea is that providing the next generation of students and workforce of tomorrow with these opportunities, we think is critically important. And I'll, kind of move things along with one of the things that we also did was we launched 2 additional organizations that I think are going to be critical as we think about this from a, Justice 40 just transition perspective. We were founding members of a global org with about 500,000 EV drivers from around the world in 67 different countries. So we're able to get a really granular insight into what's happening, not just domestically, but here, around the world. And then secondly, one of the things is being a longtime EV driver, there wasn't a community of folks. We talk about how this benefits communities and how we can begin to accelerate this and have those benefits being able to, impact these communities. Well, one of the things that happened was we launched an organization with diverse EV drivers who are advocating for cleaner public transit, school bus electrification, light duty investment, et cetera. And so it's critically important as we think that as we go through this journey of just transition to engage the folks who are currently participating in this ecosystem. Here's a quick snapshot of some of the folks from one of our previous events, but these folks are in cities and communities across the country as well as internationally, and they're on the ground doing this work. And these are the school teachers, the preachers, the social workers, the nurses, the retirees. Like, these are the folks who are literally on the ground facilitating this work. And then lastly, I'll kind of close with this. As we think about Justice 40, recently we collaborated. We take a human-centered, data-driven approach to our work. So most recently, we collaborated with Consumer Reports, Union Concerned Scientists, and Green Latinos. And what we found through national survey and national research is that communities of color have disproportionately a higher interest in clean transportation than their general market counterparts. And so literally, when you begin to think about this, it's imperative that Justice 40 is accelerated, because these are the communities that have the highest level of interest, as well as are experiencing the highest levels of burden. Lastly, I'll close with, want to invite you all to our National Mobility, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Conference, which will be October 25th and 26th in Washington, D.C. We'll be sending out more information about that. But thank you again for letting us participate. Looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple more folks to give some remarks, and then we'll get right into all the ton of questions that we have. So we can quickly, I want to go to Jim to give a quick update and presentation. Then we'll go right to Stacy and Edwin to close us out and we'll get right into questions. Jim, are you on?
Yes, I am.
All right. Floor is yours.
I'm Jim Kuiper. I work at Argonne National Laboratory, and Some of my work is a little bit more abstract in this sector, but I work with tools and analysis for a whole variety of projects. So I hope my project hosts a mapping tool, Geospatial Energy Mapper, and I'll be talking about a variety of things that tools that are available to you to get a higher level view of what's happening in the EV space, as well as other energy topics, and also how that intersects with equity data and metrics. So this here is Geospatial Energy Mapper. It's a public tool. You can reach it at that URL there, gem.anl.gov. And it's an update of the energy zones mapping tool. So some of the reports and things that I'll mention were written at the time that we hadn't launched GEM yet. So GEM is an update of that tool, and it is intended to be easier to use and understand. You should be able to kind of, if you're seeing examples in those reports and things that show that EasyMT interface, it should be pretty quickly, easily adaptable for working in GEM. The EasyMT is also still available. It just has a little extra overhead to register for an account, and but it has similar capabilities. So it has an extensive mapping library, and that allows you to rapidly visualize energy data, equity data, and a whole variety of other factors that relate to siting things on the ground rapidly and as you choose. I'll get into the modeling in a minute, so go ahead, next slide. So this is the interface of GEM. At the lower left, there are these mapping themes. So this is the default map that comes up if you choose electric vehicles. It's a dynamic tool, so we'll be adding data and changing things and adding things over time. The panel on the right controls the layers that you look at and the order of them and transparency and other things like that. And most of the tools and other capabilities are launched from the panel on the left. Next slide. So here's some examples of the content, especially equity. So the disadvantaged community definitions from DOE and DOT are available to view. So you can zoom in and look at a particular community that you're interested in and see, what charging stations are there, what the electrical infrastructure looks like, other environmental metrics, equity metrics. Some of these other factors that are listed there were identified during the project as desirable data to use for trying to seek locations for to site new charging stations. And the sentence at the bottom is really important. We've been getting a lot of feedback from users with suggestions for capabilities or data that would be useful for their analysis. It's a diverse tool that serves a pretty broad stakeholder community, including other completely different topics. But the more engagement we get, the more we can target the capabilities to those that are most useful to the users that speak up about it. Next slide, please. So this is a report left, and the URL, well, not on this slide, but you'll see that shortly. This report talks about a modeling capability that's within both the EasyMT and GEM. And that panel in the middle is the key control for running these models. So the concept is that you have a set of information that provides some metric that helps you decide what areas are more favorable for a charging station to be located. Obviously, traffic density is a factor. The assumption here is in this particular model is that we'd like to be close to a designated corridor, so it's near an exit along a corridor where there's an intention to have a network of charging stations built out. But we want to avoid siting our station directly next to one that's already there. So that third metric kind of pushes you away from existing charging stations. And all these different factors are put in and a composite score is computed, and then a heat map is generated. So that allows you to quickly focus on locations that meet a whole set of favorable criteria and are absent from other criteria. That's the general area that I work and the kinds of tools that we host. I know it's a little bit abstract when you're thinking on a, maybe an individual working in a community. So if there's some aspect that's helped you rapidly look up information, that's going to be helpful, I hope. And for planners and other higher level strategies for regions and states, these tools can help plan infrastructure at that level and help identify, gaps or opportunities for charging stations and that sort of thing. Next slide. So this page highlighted in the center has links to these reports and capabilities. There's a webinar about the EasyMT. Again, quite similar to the process in GEM. So that's, there's a presentation about how it works and how you can use it for these purposes. Next slide, please. And these are a couple of related portals that get more specifically at disadvantaged communities. These particular ones were hosted or developed through Argonne, and the URLs below. So like GEM, these are more targeted to the specific layers and topics, so there'll be a little bit less learning curve to use them. And they each provide quick ways to look at equity metrics for different communities. I think that's the last slide, but yeah, okay, yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Jim. I don't know how many people have heard of these tools. If you're not using these tools, please use them. We'll have Jim to take some questions. I know I got a question for you, Jim, and I won't ask you now, but I will ask you in a couple of minutes so they know how to reach you. Next, we're going to go to Stacy, followed by Edwin, and we'll get right into the questions. I see we got about 30 questions in the chat, so we're going to try to move through those as quickly as possible. So Stacy, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here. Champion.
Hey,
you did everything, solar, wind, electrification, biofuels. Clean up the world, right?
Yeah, we're working on it, one step at a time. Hey, thank you, Antoine, and your well-organized and really affable staff for bringing this forum together. And, I want to say thank you to Kelly also for her overview of Justice 40. It's important that we're all operating, from the same platform. So I want to begin by saying that I am happy and proud to say that the stars are aligning in the state of Maryland. We have our first Black governor who early in his administration instituted the Clean Trucks Rule. And for those of you who don't know, it applies to vehicles from the 2027 model year onward and would require 40% to 75% of mid and heavy duty vehicles sold in Maryland to be electric by 2035. We have our first woman of color as Lieutenant Governor, first woman comptroller. We have an African-American Attorney General. We sent Glenn Ivey, an African-American, to the U.S. Congress. Climate and environment enjoyed many wins during this past legislative session. And last session, we passed Climate Solutions Now, which in the country is probably the most ambitious greenhouse gas reduction legislation. And we also in 2022, I heard this comment come up in the chat around definitions. In 2022, we established definitions for disadvantaged, overburdened, and underserved communities. So, we're really establishing fertile ground for the advancement and transition to clean clean energy. Around Justice 40, the NAACP Maryland State Conference, and we're not an all volunteer organization. So, we are engaged in establishing forums for Black and Brown communities dealing with cumulative impacts to lend their voices on what a just transition looks like for them and their neighbors in their communities. We have a capacity building initiative, which provides education and other resources for communities to be heard in this transition for legislation and policy. And on the policy side, and this really gets back to Justice 40, it's very important for us that we really advance our community engagement so that these voices are no longer disenfranchised. We're involved, obviously, in engagement, empowerment, and realistic milestones around the legislation that we are using Justice 40 as an overlay to be able to implement within the state, and also metrics and accountability. We have to really establish some baselines for us to be able to determine whether or not Justice 40 is having the impact that we anticipate. The two programs we are developing are the Maryland Climate Partners Town Hall. That is a forum that we are going to be launching next week around being able to hear community voices. We have a coalition of various organizations that are in the climate and environment space that are bringing community voices to the table so that they can tell us how they would like to see these programs implemented in their community. The next one, which we're very excited about, is called Listen, Lead, Share. You may have heard of this coming out of Chicago or Illinois or New Jersey. And what Listen, Lead, Share is, it is an approach to driving an inclusive clean energy economy. And both of these programs are community driven. What prompted our development of these programs was, as I mentioned earlier, the passing of the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022. This act set the most ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets in the nation. It put Maryland on path to reduce emissions 60% by 2031, and we should be at net zero by 2045. Well, whenever you have this kind of legislation passed, it's almost like the dog who chases the car, like, what are you going to do with it once you catch the car? So as a part of this, the Maryland Department of the Environment is required to put out an interim plan to meet these emissions reductions by June 2023. And they need to release a final plan by December of 2023. So environmental health and justice advocates, as well as technical experts and grassroots leaders, are joining together through Climate Partners to engage in this process. The town hall, as I mentioned, is on April 26th, and I think they're putting a link to it in the chat. And we are asking people with their ideas for what they want to see in their state's climate plan. We're going to include their inputs in a letter to the Department of the Environment, and we have a brand new secretary for our Department of Environment, Secretary Serena McIlwain. She's really, she and the governor are in lockstep around the climate work that has to be done. You can take a look at the Moore-Miller transition plan. They talk specifically about climate and environment, and there's also what the desires are around equity for climate and environment. So again, we have that town hall that's coming up on April 26th. It's going to be from 5:30 until 7 p.m. Again, the hyperlink is in the chat. Finally, and I'll be brief, I don't want to keep us away from the exchange portion, but Listen, Lead, Share. It is, again, focused on conversations with local residents and groups on the front lines of climate change that have been historically excluded from the decision-making table. There are 5 pillars to listen, lead, and share. But the guiding principle is that the ones who have been harmed the most and have the least should have the greatest voice and benefit from the policies and projects developed to heal our planet. So pillar 1, and again, I won't get into the details in the interest of time here, we're going to prioritize overburdened and underserved communities in federal, state, and local funding investments for clean energy. Pillar 2 says that we will prioritize overburdened and underserved communities in the development and implementation of Maryland's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act plan to reach net zero again by 2045. Pillar 3 is we're going to grow Maryland's green energy economy in an equitable manner that benefits workers and prioritizes and protects overburdened and underserved communities. Pillar 4, we're going to develop a livable, walkable, breathable, accessible transportation system. And finally, the 5th pillar is building decarbonization so that it creates healthy, safe, and affordable housing spaces. Progress for around Justice 40 will not happen in a vacuum. It's going to take our collective will and might to achieve these goals set forth in the Climate Solutions Now Act for Maryland in 2022. And governments won't be able to do this alone. So the more we can engage and reach out with our communities, with our public, our membership and other constituencies, the more we are assured that this plan really reflects the needs of the communities most affected. But in closing, I want to say at the NAACP, the Maryland State Conference, we believe the success of Justice 40 will be rooted in agency. To imbue our members and constituents with a sense of influencing their own actions and life circumstances. And it is also about self-determination, having an independent, informed formation of opinion about important aspects of one's life. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
Awesome, awesome. As we break to Edwin, you're right. Agency is important. We got to make sure at the local, state, federal agency, and many of you in the private sector can use these policies and this framework for your private business as well. Because we need direct enforcement as well, because these laws mean nothing if there's a wink, wink and a nod, nod, right? I mean, I've seen bills, contracts go with no Justice 40, or people say they don't know how to implement it and all that. We're going to get into that in a moment. From the GSA to the post office to local school districts who have no people of color on some of their school bus contracts. So we're going to get into some of that, how we enforce it and how you all can be part of that and making sure it's written into the policies and the proposals, as Margaret was talking about earlier. Next, we're going to go to Edwin. Edwin, great to see you.
Hey, Antoine.
It's yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And I realize that I stand between us and the Q&A. So I'm going to go as quickly as possible to give enough time for Q&A. I see a lot of questions in the chat. First and foremost, again, Antoine, thank you for having me. And I see a lot of folks in the participant list. I want to thank them as well. They've supported us along our process. Well, I'm here to talk about what we're doing in Latino communities and Spanish-speaking communities to meet these Justice 40 goals. Kim, if you could bring up our slides, please. I'm going to go quickly through.
One moment.
Okay, great. So we recently just launched a national initiative to accelerate EV adoption and EV infrastructure investments. We're just launched the brand called Avanza EV, and our pilot region is the DMV. We're doing some projects in Maryland and working with a lot of folks here on the call. Very quickly, our goals are to do a lot of what we've already talked about, right? Improving health by eliminating tailpipe emissions and air pollutants. We want to achieve at least 50% in vehicle fuel and maintenance savings, and we want these communities to feel that they're part in contributing to mitigating climate change. Next slide, please. I want to focus more on the bottom of this slide real quick, just to share our lessons learned so far, best practices with everyone on what we're seeing in the low-income Latino communities as barriers to adoption. And this is in particular from our work this is for EVs, but in reality, we're seeing that it applies across the board to all types of clean energy services and products. The Latino community, particularly also with the language barrier, they're not getting the information that they need. So in particular, we've identified 3 barriers: affordability, charging infrastructure, and now awareness, knowledge, and trust. We have affordability sort of checked off because we're seeing that EVs, they're saying they could match gas car prices this year, maybe next year. There's a lot of government incentives and a lot of competition that's bringing those cars, the price down. And also we know that most EVs cost less to maintain. So I feel like that particular barrier is being addressed and it's affordable to our communities. But I think where we have the bigger issue is in the areas of charging infrastructure, for example, where in the multifamily housing communities that we work in, there doesn't matter how affordable it is, if they can't charge their vehicle in a multifamily housing community or where they live, they're not going to purchase a EV no matter how affordable it gets. The other barrier that is not being addressed and we're hoping to address is awareness, knowledge, and trust. And we're seeing that there's a lot of materials and outreach out there that's in English, but if most of the community speaking Spanish, or a good number of them, we need to put this in their language. We've done some parallel analysis with real estate. It's a very similar, when a Latino buys a home, it's a big decision. I think they say that the second biggest decision is their vehicle, right? So we're seeing that 40% of real estate transactions with Latinos make use of Spanish, for example. And so we feel that also parallels in the EV industry, and we need to do the same. Next slide, please. Real quickly, I just wanted to share our model or our solution that we're working with and implementing in these different regions. We call this a comprehensive EV adoption solution, and we're hoping to bring all these components in order to be more intentional and not just bring education, for example, bring education, but also bring infrastructure and resources for them to take action. I think the first component there on stakeholder engagement is very important. Bringing in partners like everyone here that's participating with the Clean Cities Coalitions and other community organizations. We're focusing in very specifically in low-income Latino majority census tracts. And second to that, I think also very important is we're acquiring commitments from site hosts, in particular multifamily housing. If we're going to be talking about EVs, can we acquire commitment from the landowner to install some charging stations so we can take some action, or the community can take some action? We're bringing in what we're calling equitable infrastructure investments, so charging stations, obviously, but also EV car sharing and workforce development. We're seeing that the Latino community actually resonates really well when you talk to them about, not only is this a product and service that I can use, but how can I be part of this, making this product or providing this service? So workforce development we see is a good entry point into adoption outreach. Very important. Everything we're doing is Spanish first, English second, and I think that's a cornerstone of our initiative. So bilingual education and outreach, many of the same activities that many of you are familiar with: community events, web and digital tools, social media, traditional media. Now just taking a little bit of a different, culturally relevant twist to it. The last piece, and we're building this through our partners in Montgomery County, we built from their initiative, is once we've done the infrastructure, the education, we also want to get them to the next level of purchasing a vehicle. And we're organizing these purchasing co-ops, aggregating demand, and negotiating with the OEMs and the manufacturers. We have support from General Motors, for example. So we're working with them to see how do we give, there's the used car incentive tax credit, there's the new car tax credit, EV tax credit, but what else can we do? $500, $1,000 off if we all aggregate our demand across these different communities. Next slide, please. I'll skip this slide. This is just a little bit more on our education model. Next slide, please. Again, we're doing intergenerational EV context. So for boomers, Generation X, Y, we're seeing that millennials and boomers are big entry point right now, but also Generation Z helps a lot to convince their parents to do this and tell them that this is a good idea. Next slide, please. Doing some national activation. Latinos love music, so we're using music, bringing it to the communities. We've got connections to influencers and some of the top Latino bands. So we'll be doing some Latino music band concerts that generate around EVs. We're in conversations on having a EV music tour bus. And of course, social media is a big part of that. A lot of buzz that needs to be generated. Next slide, please. I've already talked about the purchasing co-ops. I think this was my last slide. So let's jump into questions.
All right, thank you, Edwin. That was nice. And I love the music too. So I love Latin music. So thank you for sharing that, and some Latin food. I had some this weekend in Buffalo. So thank you.
Right.
All right. I love pastelillos, if anyone knows what that is. I love them with chicken and cheese. All right. So let's get right into it. We're short on time, but we want to take some quick questions. One quick thing, if you can, we're going to do rapid fire. One big challenge that we see is how do we get the word out to elected officials, clergy, block clubs, HOAs, small businesses, and industry leaders in the local community about Justice 40. How do we get out there? How do we make sure it's not just insiders that know about this? I like to get Stacy, why don't you go first, and we go to Edwin and Terry quickly.
Because those voices are so important, and because, historically we have not been at the table, that is why we're driving this effort around Listen, Lead, Share. It's a very effective tool for being able to gather the voices and direct the conversation to what's pivotal to being able to establish a just transition under the umbrella of Justice 40. So, and groups and organizations are welcome to join us. If you're interested, my contact information is in the chat, and having your organization participate in Listen, Lead, Share, we would love to be able to provide you with a template so that you can go ahead and provide input to your organization.
I love it. So you're offering tools people can use. I like that. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Edwin, then Terry. Any tips real quick on that? On how do we get the word out to the folks so they're knowing what's happening? I go to so many events and so many people don't even know about what the infrastructure law was, so how do we do that?
Yeah, we've been very intentional and very grassroots. We actually have community coordinators on the ground, and we're meeting them where they're at. So particularly working with multifamily housing, we're at every event, we're knocking on doors. And a lot of these folks, what we've learned is, don't know that there's more than a Nissan Versa or a Nissan Leaf and a Tesla. So I think that part, in terms of the folks that have rights to the land where a lot of this stuff needs to happen, there's a big education push, and we're very grassroots oriented there.
Okay, Terry.
Yeah, I would jump in and just say, so as we have a constituency of primarily African-American Latinx EV drivers from around the country. And one of the things that happens is that for those folks who are already driving electric vehicles in the communities, being the advocates, one of the things that we, talk to our partners about when working in the space is going and listening. Those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So if you're looking at an agricultural community in San Joaquin Valley, or you're looking at an urban core on the East Coast, one of the things that happens is that you can learn a lot from those different communities. So going and listening to see what their needs are is the best path forward.
Not going, assuming you already know based on some data you did on the website or
correct.
Okay, great. Yeah. Please don't do that. That's a conversation for at the happy hour on Friday, on Thursday. Margaret and Kelly, if you all can chime in on this. So this first one is for Margaret. this question is about contracts and proposals. You all have been leading the effort. We got to get the rest, y'all bringing some folks along, getting it in the language for funding proposals and for contracts, Justice 40. How has that been? How can you advise local governments and state government officials on to take that template? I think Stacy was going down that road as well. There are folks from all different local and state governments. How are you all able to do that? And what advice do you have, not only as they look at federal stuff, but stuff that they may want to do in their own public and private sector arenas at the local and state level?
Well, thanks for giving me an easy question, Antoine. Really appreciate that. I can say from our work with the Vehicle Technologies Office, the first thing, when it comes to managing the funding, the first thing we did was start asking our stakeholders, what are the major barriers? What has been preventing underserved communities from knowing about our funding opportunities, being able to form partnerships for our funding opportunities, being able to apply for them. And I literally have a table documenting what are the different barriers, and then what are strategies that we could implement to address them, and choosing the top 5 to start with, and then seeing how that worked, and then implementing additional strategies and going through an iterative process. I feel like in a perfect world, we would be able to launch a funding opportunity and then see the full end result of those selections and how those projects turned out before we launch our next funding opportunity. But the reality is those are always overlapping. So it's simply an iterative process. So I think listening, which has been said before, is the starting point. Listening to people about to hear about their priorities and about their barriers, and working together to figure out strategies to make incremental progress. Because I know with some of the people I work with, and I've experienced this too, it can be overwhelming to recognize how imperfect the system is, how much structural injustice exists, and all of the historical inequities that have compounded to the moment that we're facing right now. And we can't fix everything in one fiscal year, but we can be working towards making incremental progress and have a transformative end goal in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. Kelly, if you could shed some light on the why this matters. I know, Terry, you can illuminate this as well. You know, DC, you worked for DC before going to Department of Energy, but the health consequences of this is so significant. And why it matters that these communities are part of the planning so they can live longer, right? If you could share some of the points that I know you can rattle off at the top of your head around why it matters from a life and health and wealth perspective. Terry, if you can do the same, that'd be great.
Yeah, so like Antoine said, I used to be the director for air quality for DC, and one of the things that's kind of, it's not unique to the district, but it's fairly common amongst urban centers, is that like vehicle pollution is one of the top sources, locally sourced sources of air pollution in a community. And as we transition to a clean energy economy, as we see vehicle adoption begin to transition towards electric vehicles, it's wonderful. However, what we've been seeing is that the majority of that transition is happening in the communities that need it the least. And so without really strong intention on ensuring that low-income communities and communities of color share in the adoption of electric vehicle adoption without really intentional care around that, what we'll see is that the air pollution contributions from vehicle pollution will be concentrated in the very communities that are most vulnerable from a health impact or a public health standpoint already. And so essentially adding insult to injury by not only leaving them behind on the technology side, but also causing air emissions to kind of concentrate in those already vulnerable communities. And so what we know is that already low income and communities of color are more likely to be adjacent to transportation corridors, more likely to be adjacent to energy infrastructure. And so, and also have vulnerable populations in that they have public health outcomes that are disparate when compared to their wider, wealthier peers. It's imperative that we not pave the cow path, right? Continue down the paths that we have taken before, but we have to make sure that we are being intentional about bringing the communities that have been left out of the conversation along, giving them agency and power to address the clean energy needs in their community. One thing that we also know is that environmental justice is very, very local. So a solution for one community is a solution for just that community, and that we have to, like Stacey was saying, we have to listen to the needs of individual communities because they all come with their own unique characteristics in terms of health profile, energy needs, resource availability, infrastructure needs, and try to do our best to tailor what we have to offer or make our offerings flexible enough that we're able to meet the needs of individual communities.
Thank you. Thank you. We only have about 4.5 minutes left. I want to go to Terry really quickly just on the health impact, but also on workforce development. What are you guys doing I know you're working with college students, but there are a lot of folks who need to learn how to repair, install and repair EV charging and electric vehicles as well. But I know, and I'll come back over to Stacey and Margaret about all the other fuels and technologies, installing solar, making sure people know how to do that, right? Stacey, that's important. Carrie, really quick.
I guess I got to take myself off mute first. So really quickly, the idea is that, yes, as you know, Kelly mentioned, the idea that some communities are impacted first and worst, and we really need to prioritize them in this transition. There's been a lot of work published around the social determinants of health. We think that there could be even more work done to help communities understand when we go into communities or doing work with either a federal agency or private sector or some of our community partners. The idea is that most folks don't correlate transportation emissions with some of the public health impacts that are felt. So we have to do a better job of really educating communities on that. As it relates to workforce, as the federal government looks to deploy 500,000 charging stations across the country, as private industry begins to build out and accelerate their charging infrastructure, there are going to be jobs that are going to come along with that. We have been working with some agencies and entities to actually help focus on that. If we think about this, in addition to that, the workforce of the future is going to include technicians that are going to look very different than the current automotive technicians, right? So whether they're working on a transit bus, whether they're working on an electric school bus or a level 3 charger, one of the things that we've been really vastly doing is really bringing our partners in to create these opportunities for folks across communities, because we think that if folks have good paying jobs, whether they're deploying infrastructure, whether they're working on electric school buses or transit buses, they're more likely to participate in that clean transportation transition. And so it's just part of the holistic conversation, I think.
All right, so Stacey, if we can really quickly on the workforce, and then I'm gonna bring Jim in to say how they can reach him, because a lot of folks on these local governments and state governments and private sector as well need to know how they can tap into his resources.
Well, around the workforce, we've been working directly with the Department of Labor around Maryland Works for Wind, which is a program for young people for apprenticeships, et cetera, into the space, the wind energy space. We just recently passed legislation, Community Solar Energy Generation Systems Program, that makes community solar available for communities, and rooftop solar available for communities. So with the labor aspect, you know, we're running the gamut from, you know, programs for students in HBCUs. We have the HBCU BEST program, which is BIPOC entrepreneurs in solar technology. It's an internship program for HBCU students. And we are also, as I said before, engaging with the Labor Department on all the jobs that are related. There's so much intersectionality related to renewable space. I mean, health, education, housing, labor, economic development. So there's so many opportunities for labor and career opportunities that we are beginning to share with our communities so that they understand the intersectionality and how it applies to them.
We are just about out of time. I want to, Jim, how can they reach you? Are you available for presentations for organizations, both public and private sector? I know you got the website link. How can you, as that subject matter expert, assist them?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So I put my email in the chat. It's jkuiper, Kuiper @anl.gov. And yeah, I'd be happy to either give, you know, one-on-one demonstration or kind of training or answering questions, or giving a presentation on using tools or a particular, you know, analysis example as needed. So.
All right. Thank you, Jim. I wanted to say just a couple quick things. One, our office is partnering on a fleet equity project, as many of the fleets are planning for equity. We will have a couple of forums on fleet equity as we wrote before we wrap up our report that will be released this summer. So please look forward to participating in those forums. The other thing I wanted to mention, that there is funding out there for training and grants for electrification of the work, helping the workforce get ready for electrification. I know that the Office of Vehicle Technologies, hopefully one day really soon, will be announcing some funding for some of the groups who are trying to do as requested in the chat. So you all were very prophetic from my lips to God's ears, and through Margaret and others, hopefully we'll have some good news soon for some of the people that put in proposals last fall. Just some closing comments. I want to thank our speakers and staff. Justice 40 is one of the most important executive orders in over 50 years to come out of the White House. It focuses on inclusion, opportunity, financing and investments, equity, justice, life, liberty, and the ability for every American to benefit from federal investments in clean energy, transportation, and works to make sure that people live longer. Hopefully, Justice 40 will eliminate the racial disparities in health with diseases like asthma and cancer, lupus, and things like the infant mortality rate, which we didn't get into today, which are also impacted by respiratory illnesses from transportation. As we celebrate Earth Day on Saturday, let's not just clean up trash and plant trees. Let's also help save lives by supporting the full implementation of Justice 40. GWRCCC will be releasing a white paper later this week on Justice 40, and we hope that it will push more people, both in the public sector and the private sector, to do more to promote equity, justice, and inclusion. Thank you all, and have a happy Earth Day.